Well, I want to start with a question. Imagine in your organization that you were facing sort of a critical challenge. Here's the question. What's the first thing you would do? Well, today we're going to talk about that. And my name is Dr. Randy Dirks, and this is Funding Your Future Now podcast. It's designed for leaders in nonprofit organizations, in the C-suite, or individuals that are fundraisers, connecting with amazing people every day. It's my delight today to bring on the podcast an amazing person. You'll hear a little bit about her in a moment. Mary Kelly. Mary is a former Navy intel officer, and she speaks at so many different venues. One thing that I just was impressed as I've been chatting with her a little bit over the last couple of weeks, her ability to, in a variety of topics, address them, whether it's economics or leadership and helping people go through crisis and challenge and lead change. So, Mary Kelly, welcome. And I would just like to give you a moment to just share a little bit about who you are and share that with our audience. So go for it.
Randy, it's so important today for your nonprofit leaders and your C-suite leaders to really get a handle on what's going to happen and how they can lead through crisis and challenge and change. I spent about 25 years on active duty in the Navy doing intelligence and logistics work, and we faced our fair share of crises, challenges, and changes. So I have been able to take the things that I learned during that time, and I do still think our U.S. military has the best leadership on the planet as a training ground for future leaders, especially in crisis, challenge, and change. And I try to apply that today to my business, corporate, and nonprofit leaders.
Well, I love the three C's: crisis, challenge, and change. That sort of really compacts the kinds of things that you can share with others. Well, I look forward to our conversation. So I've got a couple questions for you. Here's the first one. What do you think, Mary, are the top economic signals right now that should be changing how nonprofits approach fundraising? And what do you think, in light of those, what are some things that maybe leaders are missing that they should be aware of?
That's such a critical question. First, inflation fatigue is very real. Right now, we've got a 26% rate of inflation since 2019. And everybody goes, oh, 26%. Well, hang on. When you do the math, that's only 3.93% per year. It's a lot less than what it sounds like when it's being advertised. But remember, people only remember prices of things that set in their head. We always know how much a gallon of milk costs. We always know how much a gallon of gas costs. And if that is your metric, then you are looking at milk. Gas prices are very low right now, but you're looking at milk. You're looking at meat. You're looking at eggs. Those prices have come down. But the inflation fatigue is real, and that affects giving patterns. When people are worried about paying their own bills, they are simply less likely to be donating to a nonprofit. So donors are still generous, but they are more selective, and they want to make sure that their money is going to a place where it's going to be effective. And then the second part of that is interest rates have sort of changed the psychology of giving. When people can get a really good rate of return on safe investments, donors just get a little bit more analytical. And they start to ask the same question of nonprofits that they ask of their investment advisors. And that is,
Sure.
what is what is the impact per dollar? And this isn't selfish, it's a rational thought. So we as nonprofits have to understand that fundraising, which used to be very high on just, hey, motivation, this is a great cause, please give, and people would open the pocketbooks and write the checks. It's no longer about inspiration. It's about reassuring people that we are being good guardians of their dollars.
That is so insightful. And I'm going to make a quick comment because I'm going to segue on what you just said. I interviewed a person the other day, and he said, from the nonprofit world, he says, we need to start treating our donors not just as givers, but as investors. And I said, oh, that really changes how I communicate to those people. If they're an investor, when you think of your portfolio or whatever, you have some critical questions that you like to ask for that whole process. So you brought up a very, very important point.
And for a
So,
lot of nonprofits, and so I want to just touch on that because I think that's so important. We treat our donors like a teenage kid who only talks to his parents when he's looking for the car keys. We need to be communicating with our donors more often and with with more regularity, with more consistency, so that they are reassured that what they are giving to, what they're participating, it's not just a donor thing, it's a participation. They want to be part of understanding the process. And once they're in, they're 100% in. They will beat the drum for you. They will champion your cause. But if you're only talking to them when you're looking for a check, that's not a partnership.
Yeah, really brings up the whole important point of how do you cultivate a relationship with somebody that becomes a significant donor, but it's a long-term kind of a process that has so many different parts to it. You just think of normal friendships. How do you build a friendship with somebody? And you can translate some of those things over into the donor world. Well, crisis leadership, that is something that you know a little bit about. So let's talk about that area. You've led people through life and death situations in the Navy, always having to make sort of quick decisions, but informed ones. So when a nonprofit is facing what we could say a funding crisis or something mission critical, a challenge, what's the first thing that you think a leader should do? And in also along that line, what's sometimes the biggest mistakes that leaders face when they're in that crisis moment?
So when I was in the Navy, I saw people go through this during the first Gulf War, the second Gulf War. We had really tragic things happen, and I watched this process. So the first thing real leaders have to do is skip over the first 4 stages of a crisis, challenge, or change. The first 4 stages, let's just say you've got somebody who gets a bad diagnosis. Oh no, is your first response. You reject it. And then it's, okay, well, is there treatment? What do we do next? You're looking for that next baby step. And then recognition. You're like, oh, this is really serious. We got to hunker down. People need us. And then reassurance. Let's get to it. Okay, we can do this together. Those first 4 stages, those are all very myopic. As leaders, especially in charge of groups, we don't have that luxury. You have to skip all that. You have to go, okay, got it. First 4 stages, put it in a box, get very quickly to the reality stage. Get crystal clear about what it is you're actually facing. That's the reality stage, and then realign fast. The mistake most leaders make is they and their people stay in those first 4 cycles. They never get out of it. And that's a myopic place. It's my job, my people, my community, my funding, my cause, my building, my dog, whatever. It's all myopic. We as leaders have to look outside of that myopia and look externally. And that's where we have to go from reality, figure out what the situation is, to the realignment phase. And you have to move fast. But you cannot sit around and moan and wallow and say, oh my goodness. First thing you do is put together a clarity briefing. What do we know? What do we don't know? What are the risks? What's the timeline? What is our mission critical priority? And that's where you start. You take your emotions, you put them in a box, you deal with that later. You're the leader. People are looking to you to move forward. And if you don't move forward, they won't either.
Sure. Love that process. Those first 4, I think you have to, like you said, you have to check them off so quickly emotionally so you don't get sucked into that. But then I'm just I'd love to hear your comment. So let's say that leader has identified the crisis. To what degree do you quickly bring some of your key people that can give feedback, insight, so you don't feel as though, this decision all weighs on my shoulders? What does that look like? How have you handled that in the past?
9/11 happened. I was working for a terrific admiral at Pearl Harbor. And he did exactly what you're talking about. He took all of his commanders, everybody who worked for him, anybody who even had what we call a dotted line. So you're sort of involved, but not maybe directly reporting to him. And we had war meetings every morning at 7 a.m. and every night at 7 p.m. And everybody was there and everybody showed up and everybody heard what was going on. Everybody got up-to-date information. You're expected to take the information you can share back to your teams so that they feel informed. Everybody knew there was a plan. Everybody knew what was going on. And you were kept informed every step of the way. That element of transparency during a crisis builds not only trust with you, your main leaders, but also your team members. So I was able to say at 8 o'clock in the morning, this is what the admiral and everybody else is thinking. This is what we're going to do. We have a plan. And people like to have a plan. That was the hardest thing I saw during 9/11 was my civilian friends were just paralyzed. They were sitting in front of the TV. It was deer in the headlights. They were stunned into inactivity and they were depressed because they didn't have a plan. They had nothing to do to contribute to solving the problem. And when people don't have an action step to move forward, they do nothing. They are the deer in the headlights and they just stand there waiting for the bus to hit them. That's a dangerous place to be. And I watched them, they were falling into depression and sadness and that myopia, where everybody who had something to do to contribute didn't fall into that. So action really trumps fear, and action helps you get clarity, even if you're not as sure as you'd like to be.
I really want to pick up on that point that when people have decided on a plan, then it gives reassurance to the rest of the team. The crisis is still there, the funding shortfall hasn't gone away. That still needs to be addressed. But people begin to say, okay, here's some tangible steps we can take to address this issue. A lot of reassurance. And people, I think, like you said, they just say, well, we're going to do what needs to be done. They're not immobilized. And there's even a sense maybe of, we can do this. We're going to accomplish this as a team. Oh, that's excellent. Talent and burnout. You probably have seen people burn out because they're just absorbed, or maybe they're not the right fit for that particular situation. Well, nonprofit teams face burnout. I was told that fundraising executives, sort of like the frontline people, they spend on average 18 months in an organization, and then they switch, and then they go somewhere else. Obviously, a variety of reasons for that, but burnout can certainly be a part of that. But you can't just throw money at a problem. So what actually is working to keep people, without breaking the budget, to keep them engaged, to keep them strong and vital, so they feel as though, hey, I can stay the task, I can stay the course in this nonprofit?
I think this is one of the areas that if I could do one program just for nonprofits, this is the issue I would address.
Okay.
Because burnout doesn't happen because of too much work. People get involved in nonprofits because they are passionate about it, they care deeply. That doesn't burn people out. What burns people out is when the work is pointless, when they are repeating mindless, frustrating work, when they're having to redo things because they didn't get clear communication in the first place, those things. So a few things that I would do. First, cut the work that doesn't matter. That is a critical thing to ask. What are we doing that is pointless? Where are we wasting time? And right now, the big question is, where can we use AI so that we are not doing repetitive tasks that we just don't need to do? Are we having meetings that have no decisions? Are we writing reports that no one reads because we've always done it that way? My big point is leaders have to protect their people from organizational obstacles and work that doesn't matter. And then 2, give people autonomy in the ways that work for them. Everybody has superpowers. Let them run with those superpowers. You may not be able to give people raises, but you can give them flexibility, you can give them decision-making authority, and you can give them the ownership of the outcomes. And then the third one to me is creating team clarity and stop the hero culture. And what I mean by that is a lot of times we're great at recognizing volunteer of the year. Well, hang on. What does that do to all the other volunteers who've shown up every day too? All we're doing is alienating the rest of the team. And that's not culture. That just makes people mad and it makes people feel unappreciated. And to me, it's a leader. In the military, we had this all the time. You got ranked like 1 to 75. Everybody knew who number 1 was. Everybody knew who 75 was. And if you were 1, you knew everybody was gunning for you. And if you were 75, you kind of were like, why bother?
Yeah,
So
really.
you have to make that really, really clear. And that means making sure that people have clear roles and very reasonable workloads and realistic deadlines, and leaders who celebrate collaborationship, not individuals. That doesn't mean you treat everybody the same. It means you encourage people on an individual basis, but you acknowledge the team as a whole.
So insightful. Is that going to be your next book?
The next book is called Leadership is Tough, What Great Leaders Do Differently. And this is how you elevate from the doing to the strategy and the thinking. And it is a mindset shift for my executives. Thanks for asking about that one. It's a good one. It's coming out soon.
Okay, cool. I just want to pick up on that point you talked about. Maybe I'm rephrasing it, but giving people ownership, empowering people. Yeah, people in the nonprofit world, they're there not because of the money, they're there because of the cause. They believe in it. They're passionate. Maybe they were affected by what that nonprofit is actually doing, whether they suffered or had a problem and that the nonprofit stepped in and helped them and they said, oh, I love this cause and I'm now in it. One thing that I heard recently from a leader talking about the C-suite people need to be drawing out of their staff capabilities, opportunities, and then encouraging them to expand and develop that more. So the person is saying, oh, this is much more than just a job. I'm developing who I am as a person, my character, my giftedness. And so I love that comment that you made about really ownership. So when people come to the work on a Monday morning or a Friday, they say, I am glad to be here. I know we get tired. I understand that, but there's a really strong sense of motivation. Okay, last question. I'm going to title it Take Action Now. And if a nonprofit president is listening to this podcast right now and thinking, I need to do something different in light of maybe what we've been talking about, what's the one thing this week that that nonprofit leader could do that would make a difference?
I would hold what I call a reality and priorities leadership meeting with the leadership team. And this is not brainstorming. This isn't therapy. This is a leadership meeting where you ask a couple hard questions. So what are our top risks in the next 90 days? And then what are our top priorities in the next 90 days? And what do we need to immediately stop doing to protect our capacity for doing our job? We need to stop so that we can do what's the most important thing, those top 3 priorities. And then what is one donor or funding move we can execute in the next 7 days? If we are in a situation where we really need to do something and take action fast, what can we do in the next 7 days that's going to either make a difference, move the needle, or get that donor on board? And then who owns each of those risks and priorities? And when do we next check in? And what are you responsible for doing during that time? So this is just, it's what is our reality? Where are we? And then what are we prioritizing? And then what are we going to do in the next week, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days? Because right now, the nonprofits that are surviving and thriving right now aren't the ones necessarily with the biggest budgets or the best funding or the biggest government grants. They're the ones with the clearest priorities and the strongest leadership.
You know, it reminds me of I guess the illustration or the talk about if you've got the bigger rocks and then all the pebbles, you want to make sure that you prioritize what are the big rocks. And you don't get confused with the pebbles. The pebbles are still there. They're not going to go away. But to really say, okay, like you've articulated so well, what are the priorities? What are the risks? Who's responsible for what? And then let's check back in to see if we actually did what we said we were going to do. And great insights.
And I had an experience I wanted to share with your listeners since we last talked. I am helping a widow allocate funds to nonprofits.
Okay.
And when she and her husband had talked about this, they were very clear on the parameters of the giving. But that means that I have to be talking to one of the top executives in these nonprofits.
Sure.
And I can't tell you how many of those people have not returned my phone call, my emails, my texting, nothing. And here I am sitting on a boatload of money that I know all your nonprofits are now drooling a little bit, but I'm sitting on this money and they won't return a phone call from me because they don't know who I am. And I say, hey, I need to talk to you. I've got this situation. I would like to be helping your organization.
Oh, yes.
I've tried LinkedIn, emails, phone calls. I've left messages. People don't return phone calls. So if you're not going to do anything else right, at least answer the phone.
Boy, absolutely. And I remember one president I worked for, he said, the first job and our last job is to say thank you. Thank you at the beginning and thank you at the end, but keep that personal connection with people. Well, I've got some what I call Fast Five. These have nothing to do with your Navy role or your executive role that you have now, but more who you are. So here's the first question. What would you say is the best piece of professional advice that you've received?
If you don't know, don't make it up. When I was the first time teaching, that's the best advice I got. If you don't know, say, I'll find out, and you find out, and you get back to them, but don't make it up.
Love it. Question number 2, what's a daily habit you cannot live without?
Plan your work your plan. I got that from my daddy. You plan your work the night before, you work the plan, you put the schedule together, get it done.
That keeps you on task. Okay, here's another one. Let's say if you could go back to your 20-year-old self, and in light of all the experiences you've had since then, you were to give one piece of advice to that 20-year-old lady, what would you say?
It's going to be okay. You've got this.
And you've probably had a few experiences that told you, hey, it's going to be okay. Yeah. want you to think of a failure in your life. It doesn't need to be something epic. It could be something relatively smaller, but out of that failure, it actually set you up for success. Could you share that with our audience?
When I was a young Navy officer in my 20s, I made comments from arrogance instead of confidence. And I am haunted by those comments because it was arrogant. And that was wrong. And I got smacked up the head like I should have.
Sure.
And that element of humility has stayed with me since. I got a little cocky and it was wrong.
Boy, to learn from our errors and say, want to change and become that humble person. So good, so insightful. Okay, last question. What's your favorite place on earth to go to recharge and disconnect?
Anywhere where my new husband is. He is my grounding. He is my rock. He is everything. I've known him since I was 17 years old, and we finally figured it out
Yeah.
just about 3 years ago and got back together after I'd been widowed. And I'm very, very fortunate to be reconnected with the man of my dreams.
That is fabulous. Love to hear that. Well, what a delight, Mary, just to have a very frank, open, insightful conversation that can help our listeners. And so grateful for that. Just love for you to take a moment and share with people how they can connect with you, how they could get some of your books, whatever that would be. Just take some time to share that.
My website is productiveleaders.com because who wants an unproductive leader?
For
It's
sure.
productiveleaders.com, and I am Mary, Mary, at productiveleaders.com. I answer all my own emails. I don't use a bot. I don't use an assistant for that. Email me anytime with any questions. I love my nonprofit leaders. I love trying to help them. And at productiveleaders.com/free, there is a series of free resources. There are budgets, there are planners, there are checklists, there are 5-minute plans on how to help your teams with better focus, more productivity, better meetings, how to do follow-up better, things that are really designed for businesses and nonprofits to take that leap ahead. I've been using this part of my website as the cloud long before the cloud existed, and now I just make it free resources for everybody. When I need something, I throw it in this list, and that's what I use all the time. And I've got some of my book resources are there as well. I've got about 21 books out. Some of them are good. Some are good. And they are found on Amazon. One is called Who Comes Next? Leadership Succession Planning Made Easy. The other tier on that is You Next, and that's how to up-level your team into growing into those roles, which I think is the next major crisis in both business and nonprofits, is we are not up-leveling our teams as we should. And then the individual one on how to get your own self squared away is In Case of Emergency, Break Glass. These are all on Amazon. My new one that I'm excited about is that Leadership is Tough book. And that is really for my higher level senior leaders and executives, because we worked about 3 years on case studies and interviews of CEOs and senior executives to figure out what they do differently that makes them as successful as they are. So I'm very excited about this new project.
For sure. Well, thank you for the way you are giving back to people through those resources. Could you give that website one more time?
It's productiveleaders.com. And for the free stuff, productiveleaders.com/free.
Fabulous. Well, again, what a delight to have you with us, Mary. And as we wrap this up, my name is Dr. Randy Dirks. This is Funding Your Future Now podcast, and we send these out regularly throughout the week. We'd love for you to subscribe and join in. So till the next one, we'll sign off now.